Mind magic. Our technological culture has programmed most of us to live in our rational minds, to suppress our feelings, intuitions, imagination, and creativity. After many years of research, we have discovered ways of stimulating consciousness so that it expands back into these culturally repressed areas. Mind magic is designed to lift out repressive cultural programming and leave you with self-evident reality. Rather than just tell you about it, Mind Magic gently does it to you. Here's what each of its 12 chapters helps you do. Reopen your mind to the existence of all possibilities. Drop acquired habits and mannerisms and spontaneously express your true self. Create unpredictable solutions to seemingly insoluble problems. Be real rather than perform for others. Rediscover the unique experiment which nature has designed in you. Perceive the profound web of cross-connections underlying every moment of present experience. Develop the ability to concentrate at will in any situation. Learn to not become ruffled by time pressure. Instead, relax into a previously unknown and remarkable grace. Realize the true role of the mind in the experience of the self, and so have your mind serve you rather than vice versa. Know a greater inner clarity and a greater receptivity to the inspired creative expression of yourself within. Experience negative emotion as a brief creative stimulus rather than remaining its victim. Perceive life from the point of view of all of it combined. I do recommend pausing and reading the notes. Mind Magic by Bill Harvey, illustrated by Isaac Abrams, Ouroboros Institute, Sundown Press. 1978. Originally published 1976. Under the title, Mind Magic, the Science of Microcosmology. Visualize the whole universe as one thing. Every individual of every species, every idea, every event, every moment of time, every percept, every lump of matter and energy, all parts of one thing. I do recommend pausing to look at the contents. On this page, there are especially useful keywords that will link to pages. I often find that I will open up a random page of Mind Magic and it will be applicable to whatever emotional situation I happen to be in without looking up any emotions through the index itself. Just random pages tend to help. Call it serendipity. But there also is the keywords here and another section in the back as well, which I will link after this page. I'll do short pauses for all illustrations. It is one of the things I love about this book is the illustrations. A. The human heritage, word pollution. Because words are so powerful, we tend to believe them rather than assimilate our own experience. Word intoxication. All words hypnotize to some extent. Where did words come from? From the depths of our soul, They were discovered inside us, not invented. The evidence of similar root noises for similar concepts across separated peoples attests to this. We all discovered something like the noise mama for mother. Even apes apparently make similar sounds for the same concepts as we. It is as if we were all discovering the same master language, distorted into various different directions by the effects of different genetic/environmental conditions. Words just became important recently. We came down out of the trees over 1 million generations ago. For 999,750 of these, humans used or heard only a few words each day. Over just the last 250 generations, this has increased to tens of thousands of words going through the average human head each day. Note, generation in this context is 20 years. Words have tremendous programming power. Words are not arbitrary sounds we can choose to ignore. They are tailored by physical, pre-human interference, nature, to fit our sensory cognitive biochemistry. Like a key in a lock, words were discovered from inside of us. They can be used by a talking head to a separate listening or reading head, and when they are so used, they tend to exert a behavioral impacting influence on the listening/reading head. When the ancients talked about spellcasting, it wasn't just their superstitious ignorance at work. They were recognizing the hypnotic power of communication heterodyned by the use of words. Heterodyned, power amplified. How do words heterodyne the power of communication? By making it far easier for conceptualization to occur. Conceptualization is the structuring of individual perception items, percepts, stored in the memory, into association clusters with specific relationship bonds between percepts associated, like making a tinker toy. Your concept of freedom, for example, is a tinker toy of all the specific words, pictures, and feelings you have stored inside associated with the retrieval keyword, freedom. Until words were popularized, people tended not to build such elaborate tinker toys in their minds. Associations among percepts tended to cluster into attraction and repulsion, without many finer breakdowns. This meant that we tended, when we wanted an effect, to repeat all the causes, which we associated with that effect. This is undoubtedly how the program of throwing salt over the shoulder, the program of blessing people for sneezing, and all other magical programs first arose. They had happened in the first instance, and were thereafter regarded as casually essential. Our magical phase preceded words and was pushed out by words. Words gave us the power to more easily separate things into parts. We didn't have to conceptualize only with wholes anymore. We could put a word label on a part of an event to more easily trace whether or not that part always went along with the event or not. Words appear to have kicked off a phase of developing the left lobe of the cortex, which handles data sequentially analytically rather than holistically. When we were concentrating on our right cortex, we were able to achieve certain effects of persuasion, getting our way, etc. We didn't understand it all, but we knew they worked and we used them. Childhood is a time through which each of us has the opportunity to re-experience the whole evolution of the race, firsthand in microcosm. As children, we do have magical means of getting our way through gestures and moods that somehow work. So the race has always wielded a lot of right brain power it never understood. Then it took up words, wielding vast left brain power, which the race also used with only faint understanding. As words can hypnotize, they can also dehypnotize. Out with the bad air, in with the good air. Man comes into the world. He finds out certain things. For example, he finds out that fire burns him. This finding out we call knowing. When someone has a true picture in his or her mind, true meaning that the picture corresponds to the external reality, we call this knowing. So if a man has a picture in his mind of fire burning his hand, we say that he knows that fire can burn him. So far, language does not exist. Man can know without language by holding true images in his mind. There is no believing. Believing comes into the picture when language is invented. With language, one man who knows something can pass on this knowledge to another man who has not yet discovered it for himself. The latter man, in accepting the former's knowledge as true, believes it. As we all now know, this believing often leads to the holding of untrue pictures in people's minds. The cures to cut down on believing tend to only hold pictures in one's mind of things one has seen oneself. Belief was never much of an issue before words. Belief equal belief equal be for me. I believe him equals he bees for me on that. He was there. He saw it. He sees it for me. He sees it. I see him see it. Cosmic humor. Most belief is founded on the form, not the content, of the words believed in. Disidentifying with the feeling of belief. At almost every instant, you are likely to experience the feeling about a given postulate. It is so. Look for that feeling, and when it arises, remind yourself, it may not be so. Be willing to act based on your judgment as to whether something is more likely to be true or to not be true. But do not believe that it is either true or not true. In this way, belief is unnecessary to action. Be especially wary of the feeling of belief at times when you have thought and then do not contradict it. Simply the experience of non-contradiction suggests to the belief program that it energizes itself. Thus, you must guard against the tendency to believe any thought you generate. This can be best done by remembering to say to yourself, but not in words, it may not be so, in response to every thought. Truth, intellectually and actionably. The definition of truth at the intellectual level is what can be made to sound reasonable based on the words you use. Intellectual reason can find some truth and some falsity in every statement, depending upon how it is interpreted. The definition of truth at the action level is what works when you actually try it in reality, i.e., what the universe reinforces. We need to make action decisions every second. We need to make intellectual statements a few times a day. The two are usually unrelated. Few people living in the scientific age have realized that the scientific method can be applied to life. The application of the scientific method to personal life. In the usual unscientific approach to personal life, if someone gives you a piece of advice, you either believe it or disbelieve it. In the scientific approach to personal life, you neither believe it nor disbelieve it. What you might do is test it. This also covers advice from your own thoughts. It even covers advice from your own feelings. In other words, your own feelings might steer you right, might steer you wrong. You can't assume one or the other because there have always been instances of both. You can only test a particular feeling by seeing its results. 1. First, in a simulation, run in your head of what could happen if you were to run with this feeling. Second, then, possibly, by going with the feeling in real life and seeing what the consequences are. So it all boils down to whose advice to follow. There's advice of the mind, the advice of the heart, the advice of the gut, the advice from others, the advice from books, memories, etc. The only way to know is to try experiments. Be sure you remember which advice you are testing at the moment, so you know why you are getting certain results. There's a tendency to forget. Example, let's say somebody, maybe a parent of yours, when you were small, said to you, "Hey, dig it. Unselfish actions pay back better." Let's say you had a flash of real understanding and decided to try this advice. You would have found that it works. In trying this advice out in practice, conscious of what you were doing and willing to see the advice succeed or fail, in all objectivity, you were living that moment by the scientific method. This is the way a guru lives each second, watching the evidence of experience very closely, inner and outer, stepping back a pace from all the opinions. The guru has/is savoir-faire. What impresses people about gurus? They seem to know how to do everything right. Like certain fictional heroes and people in history's favor. This implies the existence of a best operating procedure that they have discovered. The thing about a guru is that he/she is watching very closely. This way, he/she learns. A flash to the wise is sufficient. This is what neurosis is. Neurosis is the mouse endlessly trying the dead end, not learning, living with unsatisfactory stuff in one's life permanently, as if it inherently cannot be overcome. Unlimited willingness to refine one's position. In the usual unscientific approach to life, one attempts to get one's positions unshakably firm as soon as possible, and then defends against any changes to these positions with demonic energy. In the scientific approach to life, one is always anxious to take one step further in any particular analysis. Thus, one is always making provisional action decisions for this time, now, keeping an open mind about later, suspending belief and disbelief. One's positions this way gradually evolve based on a day-to-day learning from experience. Unfortunately, most of the race has forgotten how to do this. B. The present. Word pollution overload. How the tonnage of words and other input has increased past the overload point, causing hysterical imitation in the place of real life. Meditation as accelerated information processing. Information overload. A cybernetic explanation for the state of the world. Over the last 2 million years or so, we humans evolved a neuronic net which we call a cerebral cortex. We are still learning how to use this new facility, and currently it is running amok and hypnotizing us, due apparently to an overload of question-producing sensory input per average second. This overload appears to have been brought about by the successive waves of media revolution, which began with the printing press and have reached tidal wave proportions in today's television, radio, magazines, newspapers, books, records, outdoor signs, matchbook covers, movies, plays, and so on. Note, my own note. We are about 50 years since the time this book was written, and as you probably noticed, it didn't mention TikTok. I don't have a way of calculating how much change has happened since the 50s in terms of how heavily we were bombarded by media, but I'd say a significant increase. Author's note, cybernetic equaling from the Greek word for helmsman, the science of guidance systems, human or otherwise. Take the helm. The world was very different 600 years ago. We estimate that about 6 weeks worth of sensory question-producing stimuli 600 years ago is what we now get in a day, about 40 times the pressure to learn and adapt. Just as an ice age appeared to stimulate humans to discover travel and master fire, this media revolution, while it has paralyzed the brains of our leaders as well as ourselves, also appears to be a stimulus for humans to evolve the capacity to remain focused through complexity. Something I definitely need to work on. Cybernetically contemplating the brain. In order to appreciate how question-producing sensory overload can have such a powerful effect, one must cybernetically contemplate the brain. The neuronic net we call the cerebral cortex contains about 13 billion neurons, each of which is capable of relating in many different ways to thousands of other neurons around it. My neurons need to wake up. I'm still drinking my coffee here. Get a coffee and a snack. We're going to be here for a while. Let us visualize this as transparent, as if it were a force field rather than matter, so we can look through it in our minds. When sensory input comes in, it moves from neuron to neuron. At each neuron, it encounters other information, and in some cases, the contact results in a cognitive association between the new input and a memory. Brain researchers can tell that the incoming sensory data is filtered, as if through a grid, as it moves in through layers of neurons, each of which check the data from slightly different viewpoints. This is how the brain updates many of its files based on each new piece of data passing through. Something we see on the street may trigger notes to oneself in several different files without our being consciously aware of this, because there's so much going on so fast inside and out. Note: most neurons can either fire or not fire. Some, called microprocessors, have a wider repertoire. However, even the two-way neurons can have a range of meanings depending upon which other neurons are firing. Because of the many logical connections between each bit of incoming sensory stimuli and each bit we have already stored as a memory, a cyclopean computer update, the kind that would make a human computer specialist befoul themselves on the spot, takes place in our brain each second our eyes are open on anything other than a totally familiar scene. Yogis estimate that 70% of the energy we consume is consumed through the eyes. Today's media revolution produces that what we let into our Today's media revolution proves that what we let into our eyes and ears is much more of a factor in our well-being than what we let into our stomachs. We have gotten used to treating our precision electronic circuitry most carelessly by feeding it sustained hyper-overload with scarcely a let-up, as if our neuronic nets were more like Sherman tanks. There's your brain there every moment, like a secretary tugging at your sleeve, asking you where to file something, and your answer requires a decision. But meanwhile, outside your eyes, the world still wants you to do this and that, and it asks questions too. Before the media revolution, people just took their time, thought things through pretty carefully and slowly, and worked out all the details. Today, there are too many details. The brain shifts into a different kind of functioning entirely. The brain represses dissonance. It accepts that questions needn't be answered, and lets itself regard certain questions only long enough to identify them as having been looked at before. Then it puts them away with a characteristic habitual decision feeling, as if the matter were solved. We call this phenomenon hasty closure. In other words, we let ourselves fool ourselves into ignoring things we should be understanding because we simply haven't got the time. Actually, we don't know where to begin. A different kind of functioning entirely. When people are hypnotized by the things they are told, their resulting emotional motivations drive them at a hectic pace, precluding meditation on their own experience. They click into Emergency oversimplification procedure. Another way humans can process information other than the way that is normally best. In this emergency oversimplification procedure, our biocomputers follow grosser logic. For one thing, in EOP, everything must be either black or white, and it must be decided immediately based on precedent. We also have little foresight in EOP. In meditation, we can see where things will lead years hence, and so avoid entanglements we won't want then. The mind has little agility for this maneuver in EOP. Too many variables. Too many variables is another way of defining the root cause of today's mass hysteria. These variables are programmed into our lives by words and pictures and gestures, etc., via people, media, and nature. 600 years ago, it was mostly just people and nature, and fewer people contacts per day. Why is the increased load of sensory messages so devastating? Because we get attached to having our lives come out a certain way. Sometimes we get programmed into these attachments. This sets up a maze for us to get through, i.e., what we have to do to get what we want. We have strong emotional charges connected to these attachments. The more messages we hear, the more complicated we make our maze, the more conditions we are trying to bring about at once. Everybody's mazes get tangled. Everything uncopable with, we ultimately hypnotize away. Unresolved experiences. These tug at the mind. It is an automatic secretary function of the brain which does this. These are items the brain recognizes as relevant to goals, and about which it knows more clarity will be possible. It holds these messages for us and gives us these messages in odd moments. When these items first came in through the senses, they were question-producing and achieved cortical recognition, although not necessarily conscious cortical recognition. This resulted in dissonance, and the items were put on hold. Now, with the brain giving us 6 weeks worth of messages each day, needing clear meditation and learning so that we can improve our progress through our maze, we repress all of these messages. We refuse to learn. We haven't got the time. Instead, we persist in our fixed, programmed pattern. This is not a normal condition, but a pandemic, pathological, rigid shock reaction to today's information overload. Note, then the messages begin to accumulate. This usually begins at about age 5, when real learning virtually stops and lasts until death. We are now planning empirical studies to confirm or disconfirm that a sensory overload relative to meditation time to assimilate those inputs causes a shift in how information is processed. Different, simplified biocomputer logics. 2. By perpetuating robot repetition of conditioned programming, these simplified logics reduce free will, powers of observation, sensory sensitivity, and, in other ways, unnecessarily hamper one in achieving lasting satisfaction from life. 3. The simplified logics are intended by nature to be used in short bursts for coping with actual emergency threats to survival, i.e., they are an alarm reaction. 4. The pandemic problem today is the inability to turn off the ever-constant alarm reaction. The difficulty in functioning through this alarm reaction is that learning is suspended. Experiences which need to be assimilated are repressed. Meditation is the most efficient method of assimilating human experience. Specific instructions. The source of tension. Unresolved experiences cause tension. This is the body's way of alarming us. So we figure out what's bothering us. In a natural way, in a natural situation, we stop and meditate. On today's sensory battlefield, there's a general feeling that to stop is doom. Part of this is the subconscious awareness of how many messages are waiting inside and how tangled together it all is. So we keep up the act as usual and wait for some outside force to maybe come along and save us someday. This leaves us with a lot of tension. Taking it out of the body directly by massage, etc., is treating only the symptoms. The tension will therefore always return. He can't relax. He's got so much on his mind. Clarity removes tension. Tension is an alarm system prodding us to do something we are not noticing needs done. Like pain, a warning device. Tension is clutching, a keeping tight. The mind does it first, then the body follows. Tension in the body mostly comes from tension in the mind. Therefore, fear makes us take up less space physically. We find that when we really achieve clarity on whatever has been bothering us, the tension eases. Then the choices are clear, and one chooses in proper time. It is clarity that turns off the alarm system, tension. Meditation as automatic clear-out process. The number of not perfectly familiar, so as to be invisible, sensory impressions falling on the individual per second determines how much unresolved experience will be created by a culture. Subtract out that culture's propensity for meditation, putting the biocomputer on automatic clear-out, which is the fastest process for resolving unresolved experiences. And what is left is the weight of residual unresolved experiences. In our culture, the high sensory glut and low incidence of meditation creates such a backlog of unresolved activity in the brain that these electronic tensions held become a distracting screen, and we go into a kind of hypnotic trance. We handle the trivial moment-to-moment stuff and lose sight of the highest long-range possibilities of our lives. Meditation is the assimilation of information. It does to sensory food what the liver does to physical food. Unassimilated foods turn gangrenous. So do unassimilated experiences. In meditation, the mind unclutches. Super efficiently, experience is assimilated, patterns are recognized, action implications become clear. The resulting clarity eliminates the tension of unassimilated experiences which cause the mind to clutch up in the first place. Humans exist by processing information. That information in our own inner and outer sensory experience, including words, we are told. All of this tends to program us if we don't process the information in a certain way nature intended. If we do process it in the natural way, we program ourselves. The natural way of processing assumes a reasonable ratio of input volume and meditation time. In today's reality, this ratio has become highly unreasonable. Assimilation equaling higher pattern recognition. Picture a pyramid of many stories, each one containing books, a pyramid library. The basic structure of any field of information may be regarded cybernetically as a pyramid. This is how it is organized. On the lowest floor, also the largest, are the specific detail books, covering diverse facts from all the fields of knowledge. The books on the second floor cover the same fields of knowledge, but from a theoretical overview perspective. We can imagine a whole rack of books on the first floor telescoping upward to a point in one book on the second floor. The third floor brings whole fields together. The fourth floor brings everything together into philosophic viewpoints. The fifth floor contains books written about the fundamentals of philosophy itself. The sixth floor contains a single book. In the capstone of the pyramid is a single word. Each floor contains the same material as the floor below, but in integrated, reduced form, i.e., from a higher, more universal perspective, ignoring more and more of the incidental details. This pyramid model is to be applied to any field of information. It is possible for one's perspective to be on any floor, or in the capstone. However, this is not simply a matter of putting one's perspective in the capstone. It has to float up, so to speak, as a result of the assimilation process. The many unresolved experiences in one's life need to be meditated on. As a result of this process, one gradually floats upward, out of a lot of chaotic thoughts and feelings, into a sense of everything falls into place. We are involuntarily shutting down our inner and outer senses against the information overload. Most of our minds are on hold. The brain is holding many messages for you, taking up much mind space, mind energy, and mind time, giving you these same messages repeatedly, while with your conscious control over that same brain, you repress and dodge these messages. You haven't answered your own messages in how many years? There's a message for each person you haven't forgiven, and for each pain in your body, and for every other symbol of something unresolved in your life, and for every question you've asked that you're still not sure about the answer to. This is relevant to your maze. In effect, the brain knows it has the information you need, and it is trying to give it to you. Meanwhile, a set of functions, often called the subconscious or unconscious, gives you away in various social situations, i.e., embarrasses you in various ways to get you to confront some of these messages. But we are not observant because we are involuntarily shutting down our inner and outer senses against the sensory overload. Skepticism is the anus of our mind, clenching to keep out the information overload. The severest human shortfall caused by the information overload is the limitation of possibility. Too many variables, the limitation of possibility, the magic of life is extinguished. One of the most overwhelming surprises one gets in deep meditation is how complicated it really is to figure out right action in a typical everyday situation. This is certainly the key subconscious deterrent to really being. It is too complex now. We all move too fast. We pretend that we are capable of functioning in this haze of complexity. This is a hysterical reaction. What happens to most of us is that under pressure of time, we take automatic positions on things. Based on our programming, without realizing it, most people are trying a desperate short-cutting approach to existence. We label this a hysterical panic reaction because it continues to persist for a lifetime in most cases, although it proves itself unworkable every day. The realistic reaction belongs to the yogi under the tree. The yogi doesn't act on an idea until he has meditated out all of its possible connections to other ideas in his ken. Thus, the actions never snag each other's wind-up toys. All information has some intrinsic command effect upon the brain. Even rhythms may be soothing or create a wide range of other moods. Our brains are being washed in information with some command effect over us, from waking to sleep each day and during sleep. Ours is the age of background brainwashing. We don't even notice that it is there, or why we buy those products, or snub those strangers. How little of our behavior is under our own control. how much was programmed from the outside. We become shorthand human beings. There is always a subtle time pressure. Don't you dare waste your time, is the unspoken rule. Thus, when someone asks a question, we tend to flip back something that sounds like something we would say in such a situation. We usually give no fresh thought to the matter. It is the automatic pilot. Free will is switched off. Creativity is a forgotten ideal. The robot is playing its tapes. This is the eventual result of a narrowing process which takes place via communication exchanges when we are very young. We encounter such a large number of misunderstandings, with many iterations to unwind each one, that eventually we stop trying to express what is inside of us and content ourselves with flashing cliché signals which everyone understands. The capacity to remain focused through complexity is a key survival characteristic for humans today. The point of staying focused is that it enables you to catch more of the incoming stimuli, catch more of your own total reaction to these stimuli, identify the real priority items, simultaneously continue to change motor activity gracefully as needed, make decisions when needed, without distraction resulting in only partial attention to any of these. The true yogis know how to do this. Remaining focused through complexity is a thing that can be learned and trained. All right, and that concludes the intro to Mind Magic.